There is a moment in every failed war when the truth becomes unavoidable. Not when the first shots are fired, not when the first cities fall, but when the leader who started it realizes there is no version of victory that allows him to survive. That moment has already arrived for Vladimir Putin. Right now, Putin is trapped inside a war he cannot stop and cannot win. If he ends it, he risks humiliation, political collapse, and possibly death. If he continues it, Russia bleeds itself dry, economically, militarily, and demographically, until the state itself begins to fracture. This is not strategy anymore. This is escalation without an endgame. When Russian tanks crossed into Ukraine in February 2022, the plan was brutally simple. Kyiv would fall in days, the Ukrainian government would collapse. Russia would install a friendly regime, declare victory, and the world would move on, angry but ultimately resigned. Instead, Russia walks straight into a quagmire that has now lasted years and cost trillions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of lives, and the long-term viability of Russia as a modern state. Putin cannot admit failure, but reality no longer cares what Putin wants. Every option in front of him leads to loss. The only difference is how fast and how violently that loss arrives. And to understand how Putin reached this point, how the war in Ukraine became a slow-motion catastrophe, we have to rewind long before the first missile hit Kyiv. Because this war didn't begin in 2022. It began with a dream, not a military plan, not a security concern, a dream of empire. Vladimir Putin is not fighting for Ukraine. He is fighting history itself, trying to reverse the collapse of the Soviet Union and restore Russia to what he believes is its rightful place at the center of global power. This isn't speculation. Putin has said it openly. He has compared himself to Peter the Great. He has spoken about returning historic Russian lands. He has framed Ukraine not as a sovereign nation, but as a historical mistake that must be corrected. For Putin, Ukraine is not the end goal. It is the first domino. Military analysts like U.S. Air Force veteran Jack Bro have been warning about this for years. Bro puts it bluntly: if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, Moldova follows, then the Baltics. Then, wherever Russia believes it can redraw borders without triggering nuclear war. This war was never about NATO expansion or security buffers. Those were excuses. The real objective was empire, and Putin had been preparing for it long before most of the world noticed. When Putin returned to the presidency in 2012, after a 4-year stint as prime minister, Russia quietly entered austerity mode. Government spending tightened, social services stagnated, ordinary Russians felt the squeeze, but the state began stockpiling cash. At the time, it was framed as economic reform. In hindsight, it was war preparation. A Kremlin strategy document known as Strategy 2020 outlined austerity measures designed to stabilize Russia's finances. The policy worked, at least on paper. Russia's economy recovered from its post-2008 collapse and avoided the chaos of the 1990s. But this wasn't about prosperity, it was about liquidity. By 2022, Russia needed a massive financial cushion to absorb sanctions, fund military production, and sustain what Putin believed would be a short, decisive invasion. Leaked intelligence later revealed just how badly Putin miscalculated. He believed Ukraine would collapse within 3 days, not weeks, not months, days. That single assumption destroyed everything that followed. Ukraine didn't fall, the government didn't flee, the army didn't collapse. Instead, Russia became trapped in a grinding war of attrition against a country fighting for survival, with the backing of Western industrial power. And once that happened, Putin lost his exit ramps. He couldn't retreat without looking weak. He couldn't escalate without bankrupting his state, but he did it anyway. By mid-war, Russia had already crossed the point of no return. The economy had been reshaped around military production. Entire regions depended on defense contracts. Hundreds of thousands of men had been mobilized, recruited, or coerced into service. Ending the war would not restore normalcy. It would detonate a domestic crisis. So Putin made the only move left to him: double down. And that decision, to keep escalating a war he could no longer control, is what brings us to the present moment, where Russia is spending staggering sums just to keep the front lines from collapsing. By late 2025, Russia was dedicating over 7% of its GDP to defense and internal security. That number understates the true cost. Much of the war effort is financed off the government's books through forced lending by private banks to defense contractors. On paper, it looks sustainable. In reality, it's a ticking bomb. Russia has transformed its economy into what analysts now call a war leviathan, a system that must keep consuming money, manpower, and resources just to survive. Stop feeding it, and it collapses inward. This is the trap Putin built for himself. And in the next section, we're going to break down how that trap works, how Russia is financing this war, why the numbers don't add up, and why the cracks are already spreading beneath the surface of Putin's carefully constructed facade. By now, Russia's war in Ukraine is no longer just a military conflict. It's an economic experiment, and one that is starting to fail. On the surface, the Kremlin projects confidence. Factories are running. Weapons are still being produced. Soldiers are still being sent to the front. From the outside, it can look like Russia has successfully adapted to sanctions and Western pressure. But beneath that surface is an economy being held together by coercion, debt, and denial. One of the least understood aspects of Russia's wartime economy is how it's being financed. This is not a traditional war footing, where the state openly issues bonds, raises taxes, or mobilizes civilian industry with public oversight. Instead, Putin has effectively commandeered Russia's private financial system. According to Jack Bro and other analysts, the Kremlin has ordered private banks to issue preferential loans to defense contractors, regardless of risk. These loans keep factories operating, workers paid, and production lines moving. The problem is scale. Over the last 3 years, Russia's defense sector has accumulated roughly $250 billion in corporate debt. This debt does not appear on the government's balance sheet. It sits with the companies themselves and the banks that funded them. In normal economies, this would trigger alarms. In Putin's Russia, it's treated as patriotism, but loans must eventually be repaid. For a while, the system worked. Military spending drove industrial growth. Wages rose, employment surged. Entire towns became dependent on defense contracts. It created the illusion of resilience. That illusion is fading. By late 2025, Russia's industrial growth had slowed sharply. Forecasts dropped to around 1%, down from over 5% the year before. Defense factories began cutting job postings. Wages stopped rising, and in some cases, fell. This is what happens when artificial demand collides with finite resources. Russia is not producing value. It's producing consumption, burning through men and machines without creating sustainable wealth. And the consequences extend far beyond spreadsheets. Defense manufacturers are struggling to hire skilled labor. Hundreds of thousands of workers are missing from the civilian economy, either conscripted, killed, injured, or permanently displaced. Younger workers are scarce. Older workers are exhausted. At the same time, the banks funding this system are becoming increasingly exposed. If defense contractors default, the losses won't be spread across society. They will land squarely on the oligarchs and financial elites who own these institutions. That matters, because those are the people Putin actually needs to keep loyal. Historically, oligarch support has been one of the pillars of Putin's power. But this war has altered that relationship. As companies struggle and debts mount, loyalty becomes transactional, and fear replaces confidence. Putin knows this. That's why he's already begun reshaping the elite class itself. Through deprivatization and state seizures, Putin has replaced independent oligarchs with politically loyal managers. These new elites owe their positions entirely to the Kremlin. They don't challenge decisions. They don't question strategy. And that creates another dangerous problem: information collapse. Autocracies fail not because leaders lack power, but because they stop receiving accurate information. When bad news is punished, it disappears. Putin is now surrounded by people whose survival depends on telling him what he wants to hear. This has consequences on the battlefield. Russian leadership has repeatedly announced the capture of cities that remain under Ukrainian control. Casualty figures are distorted, losses are minimized, success is exaggerated. Meanwhile, Ukraine's military has adapted rapidly. Drone warfare has transformed the front lines. Poorly trained Russian replacements are being fed into a system that kills them faster than Russia can replace them. By early 2026, Ukraine claims Russia is losing soldiers at roughly the same rate it recruits them, a demographic stalemate that heavily favors Ukraine in the long term. If Putin knows this, he cannot admit it. If he doesn't know it, the situation is even worse. And yet, the war continues. Not because it's winnable, but because stopping it would collapse the structure holding Russia together. In the next section, we'll examine the human cost of that decision, not just on the battlefield, but inside Russia itself, and why ending the war may now be more dangerous for Putin than continuing it. Wars don't end when armies stop fighting. They end when societies can absorb the consequences. And that's the problem Putin cannot solve. Russia has already mobilized hundreds of thousands of men. It has recruited from prisons, poor regions, ethnic minorities, and increasingly from anyone desperate enough to accept the payout. By early 2025, as many as 180,000 prisoners had been sent to fight. Many were promised freedom. Many returned, if they returned at all, hardened, traumatized, and violent. This is not a theoretical problem. Russian authorities have already recorded hundreds of incidents involving returning soldiers committing violent crimes. Murders, assaults, organized crime. This is what happens when a state turns war into employment. Ending the conflict would send a wave of traumatized men back into a collapsing economy with few jobs, little support, and easy access to weapons. Social instability would spike overnight. Putin understands this. The war isn't just external anymore. It's a containment strategy. As long as men are dying in Ukraine, they are not destabilizing Russia at home. But this solution destroys Russia's future. Birth rates have collapsed to historic lows. Entire age cohorts are being hollowed out. Skilled labor is disappearing. Families are broken. Communities are drained. Even a Russian victory would leave behind a country incapable of sustaining itself. And that's before accounting for the political threats Putin faces from his own ideological base. Ultra-nationalists inside Russia believe the war should go further, not end. They want total domination of Ukraine. Any compromise would be seen as betrayal. For Putin, peace isn't safety, it's exposure. He is now governing a country structurally addicted to war, economically, socially, and politically. And that leads to the final question. What is Putin's endgame? At this stage, there is only one strategy left available to Vladimir Putin: outlast reality. He cannot negotiate a meaningful peace without surrendering power. He cannot win decisively without destroying Russia. So he escalates, hoping time, chaos, or death intervenes first. This is why drone attacks have surged, why recruitment quotas keep rising, why rhetoric grows more extreme. Putin is not playing to win anymore. He is playing to avoid the reckoning. Whether that reckoning comes through economic collapse, elite betrayal, internal violence, or biological inevitability, doesn't matter, as long as it doesn't happen while he's alive. This is the final logic of autocracy. When leaders confuse themselves with the state, they will sacrifice the future to preserve the present. Putin's war has already reshaped Russia. It has turned a nation into a machine that consumes its own people. And the longer it runs, the less survivable the aftermath becomes. Escalation without an endgame isn't strategy, it's surrender to inertia. And history is rarely kind to leaders who mistake momentum for control. Putin set out to rebuild an empire, but what he has created instead is a trap of his own making. A war that was supposed to last days has reshaped Russia into a brittle, debt-fueled war state that can only survive by consuming more money, more men, and more truth. Ending the war risks collapse at home. Continuing it accelerates the destruction of Russia's economy, its population, and its future. Escalation is no longer a choice. It's a reflex born of fear, isolation, and a system that punishes reality. Whether Putin falls because the war ends or because it never does, the outcome is the same: a weakened Russia facing the consequences of a conflict it can't escape. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to Media Talks for more analysis of the crumbling state of Russia.